this is for the sake of our audiences, because we need to slightly zoom out and see what happened just 3 days ago, or less than 2 days ago, actually. Iran and the Iranian delegation, the negotiators, they refused to take a 2-hour flight from Tehran to Islamabad, while the US was willing to send their vice president over a 17-hour flight all the way from Washington to Islamabad. And by the way, reports have suggested that Vice President J.D. Vance was also a pick from the Iranian side, because they wanted to negotiate with nobody other than J.D. Vance. So they choose who they want to negotiate with, and they decide that they don't want to now negotiate. US is willing to travel 17, 18 hours with their entire delegation, their entire security protocol, and the Iranian delegation unwilling to take a short 2 to 3 hour flight. What does that tell you about who's desperate to get negotiations in place? Because I do feel Iran is desperate too, but then on what terms?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think both sides want an end to this war, but on what terms is the issue. And again, I don't think it's about travel time, the willingness to take a long or a short flight. What has been remarkable about Iran's actions during this war is its ability to go tit for tat. Whatever the US does, Iran can match it. And by going up the escalation ladder with the US, not having to bow, and this is essentially what has given Iran a lot of deterrence, and why the US is unable to win this war. And I think that doesn't just isn't confined only to the way war is fought, but also the diplomacy. Because when we see the United States imposing a blockade on Iranian ships, even after Iran said that they would reduce the blockade on Strait of Hormuz, and the Americans instead intensify their blockage of Iranian ports, attack their ships, and essentially kidnap a lot of the staff working on the ships. The Iranians, they have to go up the same escalation ladder with the US, and that's why they wouldn't meet with Vance. Also, the last time the US came to Islamabad, they essentially cut the whole negotiations short. So they don't want to give this leverage to the Americans to be able to dictate how the war should be fought, how negotiations should happen. So it is a power play, and I think that's part of the reasons why they didn't want to send their diplomats to Islamabad to negotiate with the Americans, because they want the Americans not to always assume that the Iranians will stand there hoping that they will come. They would like to set their own conditions.
Even in the last round of talks, Glenn, and this I'm just repeating because the day J.D. Vance, and this is after 21 hours of talks, he gave a very short bite to the media. There was a media address, and they took that flight back to the US. And there were reports shortly before that address from the US Vice President suggesting that there is going to be a renewed round of talks later that day, which never happened. And Iran says this is exactly what we're talking about. Every time we're in the middle of diplomacy, US walks out. It happened last year, it happened this year, and it's happened again during this first round. And now Iran was the one saying we won't come to these talks at all. So for them, it's an existential threat. And perhaps that is what fuels their resolve to maintain and stay strong on their ties. And regardless of the fact that on the first day itself, Iran lost their supreme leader, they've largely maintained a collegiate approach. And on the other side, US seems largely scattered, with the differing accounts coming in from the US president himself. Divergence in every statement, in every second day. We need to keep these facts in mind while we draw our own conclusions. That's the approach that we take to point counterpoint. Glenn, thanks so much for joining me here on the broadcast. There'll be more to discuss. Look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.